Chaparro.
Compa Grillo, I love your boom more than I love my boom.
You are the original boomer.
Yeah, I'm the original boomer, but you kind of like made it better, you know, like more energetic, more like boom.
Boom.
I was like boom.
Boom. Boom. So anyway, how's everybody doing? I hope everybody's well. The new year is kicking off. Crazy as always in the narco world. A lot of crazy things happening down here, but we've got a special episode right now talking not about our usual narcos, but about some narcas.
Yes.
And
Some
fame at last. Fame at last. That's all I can say.
Narcas. And we brought in the narcas specialist, Deborah Bonello. You can see there with the Narcas book recently published, profiling some of the queenpins, the female operators in the narco world across Latin America and the United States. A lot of crazy stories and information there. A lot of stuff we haven't seen that's been going on under our noses, and it's right there. These crazy figures in the Sinaloa cartel in Honduras, Guatemala, these crazy female queenpins, which we'll talk about. So Deborah Bonello, as some of you will know, Deborah Bonello has come straight from running Vice Mexico, running the whole operation of Vice Mexico, overseeing all of the cartel coverage, including with Luis Chaparro and many other great narco journalists. But there's a lot of crazy stuff happening in the narco journalist world right now. Vice Mexico is shut down. It's gone. Boom.
So you have two
Vice
former
Latin America, not just Vice Mexico, Vice Latin America.
Yeah, exactly.
Vice Latin America's gone. Vice is on the decline. I've done a lot of great stuff over the years. It's on decline. So now you're people there looking for that Vice stuff. You better start coming this way. We're already operating together under a crew. We're calling ourselves Cartel Reports. That's expanding right across to all of these issues of drug addiction, organized crime, mafiosi, government, and everything you can imagine. We've got
Narcos and Narcas, both.
And Narcas, not forgetting the Narcas. So I know our YouTube audience is often heavily male and driving and following those Sicario videos and stuff. But remember that the Narcas are a key role in this story.
Oh, well, and we did a story a couple of weeks ago before we got shut down about how this Sicaria, this like hit team in Tulum, was it Tulum? I forget where it was, but two of the Sicarios were Sicarias as well. So women are getting into the killing business as well.
Murdering as well as trafficking drugs. So as we get into the story, before we go in, you want to support our work, you like what we do, we're going to have all of the details below. We've got all three of us now moving stories on Substacks. We'll give links to all of those. We've got buy me coffees, beers, pulques, teas, anything you want on the world. We've got links for all of that. So, you know, and so get into it. So we're going to look at particularly 5 different narcas. And we're going to begin with one which you'll already know, although some of these you're not going to know, but this one you already know. The most famous narco wife of all time, Emma Coronel. So, Debs, really tell us about Emma Coronel. Are we missing the story here? What's the real story about
So,
Emma?
I mean, I wanted to start a little bit with telling you why I wrote the book in the first place, which was very much to do with, you know, I've been in Mexico 20 years. I've covered organized crime 20 years. Not just in journalism, but working for think tanks too. And it always seemed to me like, and you know how important narrative is and how dominant narrative is in the way that crime is sort of documented and understood. And it just was really obvious to me how the only people we were seeing in terms of women in at least Latin American organized crime were kind of, you know, the Emmas. And she's a good place to start because she sort of fits into this kind of gender stereotype of mob wife, right? She's beautiful, she's very produced. Her look has sort of spawned this whole beauty look that, you know, was started, I think, by the Colombian cartels back in the 80s and 90s, but it's really on steroids now with social media, the sort of big boob, big butt, tiny waist, straightened hair, very, very white skin. So she's kind of, she's promoting this whole look, but she was also, as we saw, she just got out of prison. I think it was a few months ago for serving just 3 years, which is a low sentence. In case anyone doesn't know, Emma Coronel is El Chapo's wife, and she met him when she was 17 in a beauty contest in Canelas, Durango, if I'm not wrong. I think Chapo, correct me if I'm wrong, was already about 30 years her senior, and he was already on the lam. So when she met him and fell in love with him, they were like, she knew exactly what she was getting into. And I've often written about the kind of marriage that her and Chapo would have had, because he was on the lam pretty much the entire time that they were together. And when she pleaded guilty, not only did she admit to spending his money, but helping oil the final prison escape he made, which was it 2015, the one with the motorbike on the rails in El Estado de Mexico. She was involved in that. But she sort of had this incredibly unusual life where she was tagged to this guy who was probably one of the most famous drug traffickers in the world. His trial was kind of the biggest organized crime trial of probably our generation, right? And she was a daily vision outside the court when his trial was taking place in New York. And so when he went down and when he got extradited and then eventually sentenced, I actually interviewed the guy who taught Emma Coronel how to shoot a gun. And he said, after Chapo got extradited, she felt very unprotected, and she knew it was very unlikely that he was getting out of an American prison, no matter how much they paid in bribes, and B, she has twin girls with El Chapo, and I think she started worrying for her safety. Los Chapitos, who took over the reins, part of the Sinaloa cartel when Chapo was sent away, she's closer to their age than she is actually to their fathers. And they have a reputation for being pretty violent and entitled millennials. And I think she feared that she was at risk and the girls were at risk. So she wanted to learn how to defend herself. And eventually, of course, she ended up going to the US. Vice reported that she handed herself in. She wasn't arrested, and she pleaded guilty. But I think her power, and this is where the narrative in the book diverges from Emma's story and stories like it. Her power really comes from her attachment to Chapo, her association with him, because all of her influence and the interest in her was derived from the fact that she was married to him, not so much that she was deeply involved in the family business, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So she was famous for being this beautiful buchona and the woman, the trophy of El Chapo. Now, Luis Chaparro, I know you like the whole buchona scene. You're into hanging around that scene. So what do you make of Emma Coronel and the whole buchona scene?
Yeah, and I have a follow-up question. Do the Chapitos like her or not? Because I heard there was some tension there.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing. I think Emma Coronel was also known for his dad, right? He was already kind of like a higher up ranking member of the Sinaloa cartel in Durango, and one of the factions working with El Chapo. So it's basically a set like El Chapo married the daughter of his friend, right? Over his colleague. That's how the whole thing started, right? And when you talk about Los Chapitos, I mean, she knows that Los Chapitos are definitely after her. There is a lot of family drama around it, because Los Chapitos never really, for what I understand, they never really liked Emma Coronel. They felt it was a bit of I don't know, she wanted to, or she was about to get half of what El Chapo had, and probably left the Chapitos out of it. And they believe, this is something we don't really know, that she actually snitched against them when she was behind bars. That's a whole
Right.
myth, right?
I was going to say, when she was in custody, remember the latest indictment that the US government issued against the Chapitos talks about feeding victims to tigers.
Yeah.
There were some other sort of grisly details, but that indictment emerged, I think, just before Emma came out of custody. Now, how much of it she contributed to, who knows? But as Chapo's wife and as, you know, an occasional Sinaloan resident, I don't doubt she had a pretty privileged knowledge of how the cartel was being run.
Yeah, no, definitely. And also during the interview with Damaso, he said that he told me that Emma Coronel was one of the biggest players in terms of speaking against el Chapo, but specifically against los Chapitos. I guess los Chapitos are now fighting against everyone right now. Like these days, everyone is mad at them. They're the public enemy number one, and Emma Coronel, it's no exception. I think they're also off together. Although she opened up this new Instagram that hasn't got a lot of followers because her handle, it's kind of like tricky to find. And she's been recently in Culiacan and else. I mean, she was recently in Culiacan, in like a beauty, whatever. She mostly is in LA area, partying with her former legal representative, now turned corrido singer, mariachi singer, Mariel Colon, which is another
former lawyer, right? Her former lawyer.
Yeah, exactly.
I think she's, in some ways, she's played her cards well recently.
Yeah.
I mean, in being in this crazy position, going from being some girl in this little village and a beauty queen at 17 to being the wife of the most infamous drug trafficker in the world, if not the most powerful, but the most infamous, to being in prison in the United States, to kind of getting out, making deals, playing all these different sides. And she's still young in her 30s. She's got a future. So has she played her cards well, do you think, Debs? I mean, how should we see her in a positive light or a negative light? Or what do you make sense of her story?
I mean, it's interesting that she was in Culiacan, and the advantage that Emma has that very few of the other women in my book have is that she's an American citizen and she's a Mexican citizen. So she can move very easily between those two countries. If I were her, I'd be super nervous about going back to Culiacan. I mean, clearly she must have had some guarantee of security or what have you. Because I think a lot of the problems that cooperating witnesses, which most of the women in the major cases that I covered is that, after cooperating and like snitching on people and telling prosecutors what they know, they're freed, right? And like that has consequences, as Minilik, the son of Damaso, who was the right-hand man of El Chapo, was talking to you about, right? Like it's kind of a dangerous business. I did read somewhere also that she's like launched this business brand based on Chapo, and she's going to bring out a whole bunch of merch and capitalize on that, which makes sense to me. And I don't know whether you remember, but she did the Cartel Cruise series where she was supping champagne on the deck of some yacht. Like she's very much played into that whole bling image.
I'm sorry, that she was doing that series along with the wives of Los Gemelos, the twins, right? The Flores twins. They're also now in prison, but they're facing a lot more years than what Emma Coronel did in prison.
The real star of that cartel crew is the son of Griselda Blanco, which we'll get on to later. He's the real star there. But anyway, so moving on. I'll
just finish though, because in terms of Emma and her future life, Bonnie Clapper, who's a US prosecutor turned defense lawyer, I was asking her about Emma a few months ago, and she said the thing is that everyone knows who she is. So like if she tries to get her girls into private schools or what have you, I think it's going to be challenging for her to escape that kind of fame. So it probably depends where she is. Like she'll probably do okay in Miami, where they love that kind of stuff, but like perhaps less so in New York. I don't know, but it's going to be very hard for her to blend in, I would say.
And that's all about that kind of recreation of drug traffickers rehabilitating themselves and how much even that we should look at that as being good or bad. But now, a lot of, everyone's heard of Emma Coronel, but a lot of these people they haven't heard of that you investigated and looked for in a book, like Luz Fardo. Who is Luz Fardo? What's her story?
So Luz Fardo Campos was arrested in Colombia. I think it was in 2013. She was there doing some work for an associate of hers. She was arrested, on drug charges in Bogota. And a few days or weeks after she was arrested, her adult sons were murdered in Hermosillo in northern Mexico. She was charged with running her own independent drug trafficking organization out of Sinaloa. One of the witnesses in her case actually referred to her as the female Chapo, and that she'd had numerous conversations with Chapo on the phone. What I can say with confidence, and I don't know whether you guys agree, but I don't think she would have been able to run a cocaine trafficking ring, bringing dope from Colombia across Honduras and through Mexico to the US without the approval of the Guzman family. Like, I don't think you can do that without them signing off on it, because they kind of control that business. She was born in very rural Sinaloa and studied law, brought up by her grandparents. She so she was kind of a middle-class woman with an education. She could have done other things, and she decided to get into the drug business. She didn't have a husband who worked with her from the evidence that I saw in court, and she only counted, in terms of the men in her organization, she counted on her sons. And so when they were murdered, her interpretation of that, according to her criminal lawyer, was it was a warning to her to keep her mouth shut once she was in US custody. And that message got to her loud and clear. I mean, she, of all the women in my book, I think she was the only one who didn't plead guilty. She went to court. And as you know, when you do that, the trial is sort of all your dirty laundry on show, and you can't negotiate your sentence. And she got a really harsh sentence. I think they sent her down for either 23 or 27 years, I forget. But according to her lawyer, who, of course, you have to take it with a pinch of salt, but her silence was due to fear for her family. I met her dad when I was doing research for this book in Culiacan. Her grandfather, who brought her up. He still lives there. So does a sister of hers who's married to a local politician. So I think she felt like she didn't want any more harm to come to her family, and that was an inevitability if she pled guilty and cooperated with the DA.
Hey,
So
do you think? I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you think, Deb, that there is a difference on how a narco, like a male, takes these kind of threats or the killing of a son than what how a mother deals with the whole thing, how a woman deals with all this thing? Is there actually a difference?
I mean, I'd be interested to compare. I remember when Chapo's son was murdered, I think by the Beltran Leivas, right, in Culiacan. I think the response was explosive, right? And yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, her response was to sort of shut down. And actually, my sources tell me that she's never really been the same since her sons were killed. Like, it had a really very severe effect on her mental health. So perhaps, yeah, there was less of a kind of, what's the word, guns out response. And it had the impact that the murderers were looking for, which was to shut her down. And the other thing that's really interesting about her case, there are lots of telephone transcripts in the court documents where she's talking to people in the US who've kind of messed it up and like lost shipments or gotten arrested. And at no point does she threaten them with violence. At no point is she like, we're coming for you or whatever. I mean, I don't want to sound like some Netflix series. I mean, and I'm thinking, well, maybe she outsourced the violence to her sons, or she outsourced it to the Chapitos or Chapo, and just being allied with him sort of was enough of a calling card. I don't know, but she didn't carry herself and communicate in that way that was like, we're going to fuck you up because you lost that drug shipment, if you know what I mean, which is also super interesting about her.
Yeah. when we get a couple more, but when we get to Griselda Blanco, she's a woman who did use a lot of violence and did play a very tough game. But I think it's very interesting how within the Sinaloa cartel, we know, which we've talked a lot about, really what is the Sinaloa cartel, this big federation of gangsters. We have a lot of people can create their own business within inside it and like pay off El Chapo or pay off El Mayo or pay off El Chapo Isidro. You know, some of the big bosses, they can still move that cocaine. But now getting a bit further south, you also profiled somebody in Honduras, Digna Valle.
That's right. That's right. So the Valle organization was in the crosshairs of the DEA big time in 2013. And one of the trials I'm most looking forward to this year, actually in the US, is that of Juan Orlando Hernandez, the former Honduran president. Now, her family were working with and aided and abetted by Juan Orlando, or so say a lot of Honduran narcos who got taken down around that time. It was the Valle cartel and all of the Cachiro organization as well. So the Valle cartel, her family were based in El Espiritu, which is just on the border of Honduras with Guatemala. I don't know whether you guys have been there. I mean, it's a pretty atypical border, but like, you know, sort of NGO reports say that it's one of the most lawless, dangerous parts of Latin America. And so her family started off as contrabandistas, you know, getting cattle across the border for like $80 a pop, and a ton of cocaine they moved across from Honduras to Guatemala for the Sinaloa cartel. She was making about $800,000 according to court documents. So, you know, when the cocaine train came knocking in the 70s and 80s for, you know, poor rural families like hers, I think they didn't want to say no, right? I mean, it's hard to say no to those kinds of profits. She was the oldest of 13 siblings. You know, she came from this massive family. And when I got to the town, I went there with a former Honduran law enforcement official and a local journalist. And the size of the church in the town that had been built by her family was the size of a cathedral, you know. And this town was like a 3,000 dirt road town that had all these poor houses, and it was punctuated by these massive sort of narco mansions. Hers was on the way in, and you know, it was a 2-story concrete monolith with a pool in the middle. But construction had stopped because she was the first of the Valle cartel to get arrested. I think they arrested her either 2012 or 2013 when she was on a trip to Miami. So I'm assuming she didn't know that there were charges against her in the US. Otherwise, she probably wouldn't have traveled. But her arrest basically brought down her extremely violent brothers who kind of behaved like Vikings in the village. She brought in her son, her daughter got arrested in Honduras, and sort of the whole Valle cartel sort of came tumbling down for a while, thanks to her, really. I mean, she started it off.
So she was the lead. Now, you mentioned she was working, probably grew under the former president, Juan Orlando Hernandez. I interviewed him back in 2014 when he just took power, and he was like, you know, America, give us money. You know, we need America, give us money. You're the ones taking all the drugs. Send us some money to fight drug trafficking. It turned out he was a big time cocaine trafficker, or he's going to be on trial finally this year in the United States. So that's very interesting. I mean, again, do you think, I mean, looking at her business, the different people you've studied, is there some kind of differences you see in the way they do conduct the narco trade compared to men, or is it much of the same thing they do?
So, you know, when I went to her town, the craziest thing happened, right? She was still in Houston. She'd managed to get the right to stay under CAT, the Convention Against Torture in the US, after she came out of seven or 8 years of time in the US justice system. So I end up next door to her house, which is untouched. No one's ransacked it, unlike all the other big narco mansions. And I'm sitting with her neighbors. And within 5 minutes, her neighbor comes out from the back of the house with Digna on a video phone call. And she's like, oh, Digna wants to speak to you. Bear in mind, I'd asked her 2 or 3 times through her sort of legal representatives to speak to me. She hadn't. So I was like, oh, I wonder if she's going to realize that I'm that annoying girl who she said no to 3 times. And now I'm sitting with her next door neighbors. I remember turning around to my colleagues and they were like, and clearly the women who I was sitting with were flagging me. Do you know what I mean? They were letting her know that I was there and I was asking questions about her. And they had nothing but good things to say about Digna. You know, she built the church, she owned these coffee ranches with her family. They were benefactors and they would give jobs to the locals, etc. But then when I spoke to immigration lawyers in the US who represented people who had fled that town to seek asylum in the US, some of them had been working actually as DEA informants to construct, you know, the charges against Digna and her family. There was one story that an asylum seeker told me that she had sent like 2 trucks of armed men round to her family home to shut them up. When Digna found out that they were working as DEA informants, she sent out a hit on them. Now, of course, people seeking asylum in the US have their own axes to grind, right? They want to make home seem as scary as possible. But it seems to me that Digna was adopting the tactics of all narcos, right? Which is loyalty is such an important part of their business, and people who blab have to be kind of gotten rid of, you know. So
what was she like on the phone? What was she like when she talked to her on the video phone?
It was really weird, you know. She was like, she was in her late 50s by the time we spoke, late 50s, early 60s, and she seemed very discombobulated. You know, she hadn't been long out of immigration detention. I didn't get the sense that she spoke English. We spoke in Spanish the whole time. I don't think she realized who I was, and she was like, oh, go see the church. I'm very proud of it. I actually visited that town with the local bishop because you know how the Narcos and the Catholic Church have quite a loving relationship, and he was kind of a good intro, but he was also you know, she loved seeing the bishop on the phone because he was sitting next to me, and she had a lot of love for the Catholic Church. You know, she kind of seemed like vulnerable and a bit, you know, one of the women in the room was talking about a male relative of hers who had died, and she kind of, you know, she started crying because she was sad about it. So she didn't seem like a kind of scary badass. Do you know what I mean? She seemed very human. She didn't seem like, I can see like we're approaching the end. She didn't seem like anything like Griselda Blanco, for example.
Before yeah,
Griselda Blanco, let's get in there. What do you say?
Before we go to Griselda Blanco, I think there's an interesting thing that you have in your book. I have it on my hands right now, and I remember this part where you're talking about like how we perceive power in drug trafficking organizations or in cartel, and we receive power as violence. I mean, the more violent one of these subjects is, the more powerful we perceive he is. But that's something that different. It works different with women, with the exception being probably Griselda Blanco and probably a couple of few others, but notably Griselda Blanco, right? But that I think that when you talk about the prism as for what we really perceive power, I think it's an interesting note to go into Griselda Blanco.
Yeah, and for example, to end on Digna, her brothers had a reputation for picking up young village girls, taking them to their mansions, having their way with them, letting their security people have their way with them, sending those girls home sort of broken, and telling their families that if they reported it, they would all be killed. Now, Digna, I don't think she was involved in those gang events, but she definitely let them happen. So she was allowing violence to happen because it was convenient to the interests of her family and her organization.
So you still have to make that kind of pact with the devil that a lot of drug traffickers do, and which Griselda Blanca did. So let's get into Griselda. So Griselda is probably the most infamous of all of the female narcas. There's a new TV series coming out with none other than Sofia Vergara, the beautiful Colombian actress, playing the not so beautiful Colombian narca. But anyway, very, very famous for, among things, being known as the Black Widow for murdering her husbands, moving a lot of cocaine, being really involved in the Miami cocaine cowboy wars. So what do you make of Griselda?
Yeah, I mean, Blanco came up through a very different time as well. I mean, I think it's important to remember Latin America is still today a deeply machista society, right? But she was back in the you know, the 60s and the 70s when things for women were even more limited than they were. She came from grinding poverty. She was very, very poor. And I think she allied herself with powerful criminal men right from the beginning. I forget the details, but she started off in like petty crime, and then like she moved up. There's lots of interesting details about her. I haven't seen the Netflix show, so I'm interested to see whether this features, but that she was bisexual, that she understood the power of using women as well as men to achieve her criminal interests. And yeah, I think she understood very early on. And we all know that violence is a very, very established feature of a lot of Latin American society, but particularly, you know, in very rural, poor places. I think she probably got used to violence from a really early age and wasn't scandalized about it in the way that some more kind of, you know, women from different parts of the region and different social classes might be. And she learned pretty early on how to use it, you know. And I've only seen the trailers for the Netflix series, but they have dulled down Vergara. She's not like a sex bomb in the way that, you know, the female protagonists in Narcos are. And I loved the trailer, which is, you can see that the male narcos are already kind of annoyed that she's a female boss. And at that time, it was practically unheard of. I mean, I think now it's becoming increasingly common, but back then you know, it just, I don't think it happened, you know, not, especially like not someone who rose to the fame and notoriety that she had.
And she was doing this shit in the United States. I mean, she was doing a lot of crazy stuff in Miami, and she got this army as well of the Cuban Marielitos, the Cubans who'd come over out of prisons and stuff and just turned them all into hitmen and stuff. So she was doing some crazy stuff. And then she finally died herself a violent death back in Colombia, buying a big bunch of meat, I think, at a store, and somebody came down a motorcycle and gunned her down.
Yeah, I think she was killed standing on a street corner, right? But I think what's also interesting about her is, and again, like this is the case for so many women in my book that are different to Emma, is she wasn't like stereotypically attractive. I think there's this idea that's kind of a must-have for women who make it in male industries and male environments. And like she was clearly like not, like she was super strategic, super smart, totally ruthless. I mean, I don't know I can't remember how many of her husbands she killed. How many were there?
Yeah, I mean, there's different rumors. Some say it's 3, some say it's 2. A lot of them died under mysterious circumstances, and it's kind of you know, yeah. I mean, yeah, she was real short, kind of plump. I mean, you see the photos of her, but I think she was kind of what's the a bit of a nympho as well. I think, wasn't she? I think as well, you know.
Yeah, I've heard.
Yeah.
I'm interested to see how that's depicted in the series.
So yeah,
is it just me who's heard like about orgies and like just a lot of
they talk about I mean, these are the stories about orgies in Miami mansions and, you know, all this kind of stuff. But very quickly, we've got a few minutes left. We're going to rewind the clock, you know, rewind all the way back to the 1920s in Lewis's town and La Nacha. Who's La Nacha then? Who's La Nacha? Who the first female queenpin all the way back?
I don't know if I want to jump in, Debs, on La Nacha.
Do you want to do it? I mean, it's your town, so you do it. But yeah. I think the interesting about her is, since the inception of the narcotics trade between America and Mexico, you've had women right at the top, you know. And I think both La Nacha and Lola La Chata, who was another woman who was operating around that time, both of them were women of color, They came from very poor backgrounds. Again, they were totally out, you know, they were totally like stepping out of their social and racial and gender expectations for women of that time.
Yeah, no, definitely. And one interesting thing about La Nacha is that a lot of the people thought that it was her husband actually the one owning the business and running the whole thing, but it always has been La Nacha. There's a lot of rumors in between the especially the like Sinaloa cartel henchmen in Culiacan specifically, people that are related, some people that are sicarios, like low-level people, that's the same way they feel about the sister of El Mayo, Modesta Zambada. They feel that she's actually the one owning the whole business and the one who started the business in the first place and then brought El Mayo into it, and she's still at it because she's still, I mean, she's still, if you look in the property taxes, whatever, in Mexico, most of the properties are under Modesta's name, and El Mayo is nowhere to be seen, which is interesting. And I think that was happening back then, but it had to go through several, even decades, for people to actually recognize that it was La Nacha all the time, and she was the biggest one there. And El Pablote was basically just her husband, right? Like, I mean, he was part of the business, but
he was a police officer, right? And then he died. And, you know, the two things to end, because I know that we're running out of time, but one thing that's super interesting is that all women without fail brought their kids into the family business and were judged for it. You know, you often see the narco mami moniker. You're never going to see people calling Chapo el narco papi or questioning his value as a father, despite the fact that his 3 sons are now the most wanted people in Latin America. And you know, I just love that kind of that.
Okay, just to cut out, because we're about to cut out any second. So
yeah.
Great stuff. Narcas. Check out the book. Check out Deborah's Substack, Lewis's Substack, Lewis's Buy Me a Coffee, my own Buy Me a Coffee, all our stuff. And it is Cartel Reports. It's our crude, ever expanding venture. So, outro boom.
The boom out. So we're booming out with Narcas book on camera. See you guys on the next one.
Thanks, guys. That was fun.
See you later then. And just keep at it. They're still giving us more time here, so it's still rolling away. All the links below if you got this far. And yeah, we love you.